Not my revenge, but my professor against cheaters. I took the final for an engineering class this morning. Usually 1 or 2 people will go to the bathroom during class. However, for totally unknown reasons, about half of the class needed to use the restroom during the exam. Obviously, a vast majority of them were looking up the answers on their phones. This irritated me, but I just stayed focused and barely finished since it was a hard exam. I remembered that there was one particular problem that was only barely related to the stuff we went over in class, where part A was fairly easy, but I had no idea how to do part B. I didn't fret over it too much though, since that part was only 5 points out of 100. Well, our professor, who is on the older side and I would have thought was somewhat ignorant of technology, sent us an email just now explaining his diabolical plan to catch cheaters. Many of the students in this class use Chegg, a website that has answers to lots of homework questions if you're not familiar. To be fair, I have an account too, though I only used it for studying and checking homework solutions. Anyway, he explained that he was tired of people going to the bathroom and looking up answers on their phones, so he made the question I mentioned earlier as a trap. He purposely made part B impossible to solve, and about a month before the final, he got a tar with a Chegg account to ask the exact question, which was distinctly worded to be unique. He then created his own Chegg account and answered the question with a bullshit solution that seems right at first glance, but is actually fundamentally flawed and very unlikely that someone would make the same assumptions and mistakes independently. He said that out of 99 exams, 14 of them fell for the trap, and that everyone who had his wrong solution on their exam was given a 0 and reported to the university for violating the academic honor pledge they signed on the front. He also sent an email to all the other professors in our department giving them the list of cheaters. Edit, I forgot to mention he gave full credit on part B of the question to everyone else. Vast majority of my profs have students turn in their phones and leave their bags at the front of the room during exams to prevent this exact scenario. I've had a couple classes where you can't leave whatsoever until you hand in the exam. My day was before mobile phones, and I was wondering how a professor tries to prevent cheating via mobile phone. Thanks for sharing, as I am curious. In college, master's level heat transfer class, professor gave a problem where the differential equation was impossible to solve. The entire class of master's and PhD candidates came back with the same issue. Professor told all of us to go back and try again. Twice. After the 3rd week of trying, he came back and said he finally tried the problem himself and it was impossible to solve. Never felt more proud in my college career. I was a tar for a professor like that. He wrote the tests and homework the day before giving them to the students, so they weren't very polished. Half the questions ended up having 4 different possible answers, depending on what assumptions the student made. Grading those things took for goddamn ever. I once had a professor hand out 4 copies of a test. 1 on white paper, 1 on yellow paper, 1 on green paper, and 1 on pink paper. When we got our marks back, someone asked how he knew which scantron went to which test. That's when he told us that they were all the same test, just the paper was different. This got people to stop looking at their neighbor's work. It was pretty clever. Instructors who actually use 4 different exams print them all on white paper. That way you copy off the wrong exam. This is amazing. I've seen some stories like this, and it always makes me glad I don't use Chegg for tests. Honestly, if you're cheating on a proctored test, you deserve to get caught. Study like everyone else. I mean, there's no way to prove the cheaters here cheated during the test. Technically, as it was out in the open on Chegg before the test, they could have seen it then. The zeros would be reverted by my school's honor board because of this. I'm surprised you're allowed to leave the room and come back during an exam. My professors won't allow anyone to leave unless they turn the test in. And once it's turned in, there's no going back. My school's rule is all bags and phones up front. No leaving in the first 45 minutes. And only 1 person can leave at a time. This still allows you to leave and still do your test when you come back. Teachers are also able to ask for phones to be handed in before handing out the tests, though this is for smaller classes. When I went to university in my area, switched to a polytechnic when I realized I wasn't in the right field, same leaving rule applied, but you had to check in and out with the people. And I heard some courses had a tar escort you to and from. So it really differs depending on what type of school you're at, what program, and the teachers involved. But ops professor is genius. And fully within their right. Probably got approved to do it as an experiment. Professor here. I did something similar. I gave short answer essay questions which were hard to cheat on with a phone, but put 3 impossible to answer extra credit questions that could each be answered with a few words and could be easily looked up on a phone. I made those extra credit questions worth a decent chunk of points. I could tell when my good students got to the extra credit questions because they would chuckle and shake their heads. A few students answered them correctly, which was impossible. Those same students bombed the essays, which meant they didn't know the course material but somehow knew obscure facts about the various scholars we studied. It turns out that one student finished the exam early, wrote the extra credit questions down, looked up the answers in the hallway and sent a group text to her friends in the class. Those friends managed to sneak a peek at their phones and wrote down the correct responses. The funny thing is, another student saw them checking their phones and stuck around after class to tell me. When I confronted the students about using their phones during their exam, they denied it, so I pulled out their exams and asked them how they knew the answers to the impossible extra credit questions. I also asked them the questions again and none of them could answer them. Case closed. How were the questions impossible? Did you ask what Galileo had for breakfast or something? Interesting. I play a lot of competitive chess and sometimes there are metal detectors to prevent people bringing phones into the venue. I've also been on the receiving end of a player who was using a computer and later kicked out of the tournament. This left a very sour taste in my mouth as it kind of ruined the tournament for me. So I can say I have experience of 2 very different ways of stopping cheating. In all honesty, I'd prefer that no one is even given the opportunity to cheat rather than this entrapment stuff. A buddy of mine is a serious Magic: The Gathering player. He came to my hometown a few years back for a tournament and I went to watch him play. He asked his competitors if I could watch and they allowed it on the condition that I set my phone down in plain sight during matches and that my hands were visible at all times. Little did they know that I hadn't the slightest idea what was happening during each game. I'm a college professor too. I've never gone that far. But damn. The thought crossed my mind when I first started teaching. Instead of expecting my students to memorize every single math equation perfectly, I have them create a Microsoft Excel calculator for the problem and I grade that. I would rather have my students have a valuable resource saved somewhere to use later in life, instead of making a mistake by trying to recite them with 100% accuracy. I've seen people make some shizzy mistakes in real-world applications all because they thought they had it all memorized. It doesn't matter what you learn. If you don't use it every day, you will lose it. This would be fantastic, as I'm currently taking college algebra. My problem is I am forgetful and all the rules that compound. You get to chapter 7 and have to remember rules that applied in chapter 4. But if I could learn to program a problem into Excel, it's 2 skills. Programming and understanding through trial and error. In grade school there was a few kids with calculator watches late 80s early 90s. They thought they were slick on the mathematics exams. Using your smartphone to cheat during an exam is pretty bad, I know. Then again, smartphones didn't exist when I was in school. I knew a kid in middle school who tried to do that. But his watch beeped whenever he typed anything in. So he got caught very quickly. Not the brightest dude. I sort of had the opposite happen. Not a cheating story but a life lesson. The professor was completely and totally honest. 2 tests for the entire semester. A midterm and a final. Multiple choice tests. Open book. Bring your notes. It was all allowed. You are adults now. People in the real world can look things up when they are working. You can too. However, it was 100 questions and you only had 3 hours. He was upfront about this too. He told us to study. That we would need to know the material. But when the magic words, open book, were uttered, all thought processes stopped for a good portion of the class. Do the math. 3 hours is 180 minutes. If you took 2 minutes per question, that is 200 minutes. I studied and built myself an index of my lecture notes. I flew through the stuff I had studied. I spent what seemed like an eternity looking up the few questions I wasn't sure of. I was double-checking anything I wasn't 100% sure of when time ran out. But I had finished every question. Those who didn't study wasted all of their time flipping back and forth through their textbook and notes looking for the answers and never finished the test. I had a high school chemistry teacher who let us choose what kind of test we wanted. He put up examples of his multiple choice tests and of his essay problem tests. We unanimously agreed that his multiple choice tests were fucking evil, and chose word problems and essays. So when you say Part B was impossible, how did he separate the Chegg answers from the legit ones? If it was impossible, were you just to leave it blank and move on? Question: what's 2 plus 2 to 2? Chegg: well, the solution to 2 plus 2 to 2 is you obviously have to do 2, 2, 2 to get the right answer. Cheaters: copies 2, 2, 2. Professor: you fell in my trap. Cheaters: surprised_Pikachu.jpg. You took an engineering final this morning that required calculations and the professor already graded all 99 of them. Reported them all to the university. Emailed all the professors and shared this knowledge that all this occurred within a few hours of the final being completed. That happened. He said that the professor sent them an email about the end part. Definitely plausible to check 99 exams in 5 hours for one thing. Especially if you feel that you were rather clever about it. In the late 90s, when graphing calculators could first really do calculus, my brother took a calculus class that allowed calculators. The old professor kept telling students that they needed to actually learn how to do the problems. While the students snickered at the old dude who didn't know they could just type the problems into the calculators and get the answers. On the first test, their calculators couldn't solve any of the problems. Bitch, you thought. Seems like it would be easier to just not let people leave the room during the exam. Like every other university in the history of ever, I've never not been allowed to go to the bathroom during a university exam. My math teachers in school would always disregard the answer you gave and made you show your work instead. Can't cheat that part. My intro to math teacher counted nearly half of my problems on major test wrong because I solved the problems in a different way than she taught. Showed the work and everything. Was fucking ridiculous. I find the majority of this story suspect. For starters, typically you can't leave exams at universities without prior approval, e.g. disability services. But that one is easy. This professor created this scheme for cheaters. Unethical. Yes. Cool. But unethical. But that's still not the problem. Your professor not only caught all of these cheaters, but sent the names to all other professors in the department, and you knew he did that. Either most or all of this story is fake. Or your professor violated FERPA so hard that they should be more worried about breaking federal law instead of cheaters. It's one thing to spread this to other professors. But if other students know, well, it's lawsuit time. Unless you're at a private university. Then it really depends on their code of conduct. Source: I work at universities and I know that this whole thing is fake or a huge violation from all parties involved. If this is in the US, this could violate federal law, specifically FERPA. You can't share academic documents performance without consent. When you violate the academic dishonesty clause that is in every student handbook, the professor is 100% allowed to share the information with the school.